Hello and welcome to Bloke on the Range. Yes, I've got the number 4 back on the table. This time we're going to take it apart and have a look at how the forend attaches to the woodwork. Now, a lot of people who have clearly never had one of these or taken it apart say, two-piece stock's weak, inaccurate. Why? I mean, globally, really, should it make any difference? There's various good engineering reasons for wanting to use a two-part stock. For instance, you can make it out of smaller and thus cheaper bits of wood. So 2 smaller bits, smaller blanks, one for the butt, that sort of size, one for the forend, sort of that sort of size, rather than one big blank that has to be significantly more depth and you've got significantly more wastage. You've also got a much more intimate contact between the receiver and the buttstock, which going right back to the start is useful if you need to give someone the good news like that. And later it's a good idea for launching rifle grenades, because you've got transmission of the recoil straight back to this piece of wood. It also means if someone breaks the butt by giving someone the good news or firing a rifle grenade, you only need to replace half of it, not the whole thing. Now, the really expensive bit is the forend, because this is the bit that has a massive impact on accuracy. And there's no reason why a 2 or a 1-piece stock is superior on that front. Now, if a 1-piece stock were superior, this would have been very simple to see, because you could just go back and look at newsreel footage from, say, the Queen's Prize and King's Prize. It would have been King's Prize then, because there was no Queen then, there was a King. It is the blue ribbon of Commonwealth rifle shooting. The final of the King or Queen's Prize still is shot with 2 sighters and 15 shots to count at 900 and 1,000 yards. And if you look through the newsreel footage, you very, very, very rarely see a P14. Now, these were P14s were surplused off after the First World War, and what typically happened was the P14s were more dominant at close range, and the SMLEs, and then later post Second World War when the number 4s came in, they were plus and minus. Basically, once there were SMLEs and number 4s in the target shooting system, they were fairly equally represented amongst the winners, amongst the top 100 in the Queen's Prize, those that got through to the final. Personally, in my era, I never quite managed to get through to the final. In my best shoot, I shot clean at, because you shoot, the second stage is 2 sighters and 10 to count at, in my era, 300, 500 and 600. And I had a nightmare at 500 and dropped 2 points. And even though I shot clean at 600, I was a few V-balls, which is British for X-rings, off the final, which was a bit of a shame. Never mind. Anyway, the wood to metal contact needs to be strong and intimate and even. And as I mentioned on my TFB video, we need, on the number 4, we need muzzle pressure for good shooting. And it's also worth noting that in the competition shooting, Queen's Prize, everyone was using an aftermarket windage adjustable diopter with variable size apertures, and everyone had their rifle gunsmith fettled, whether they were a serving person and it was their unit armourer who fettled it, or whether it was a commercial gunsmith. They were all fettled, because an average military SMLE is not as accurate as an average military number 4. But with the gunsmith fettled ones, there seemed to have been absolutely no difference. So let's take the wood off this and have a look at how it works. Right, so first of all, let's get the bands off with my really high quality screwdriver here. Now, the bits are high quality, the screwdriver itself is not. So, the middle band, that sling swivel comes off, screw comes out. We don't want to mix them up, not that it really makes an awful lot of difference. And these are not hinged or anything, so they don't come off quite that easily. Now, the important thing with the top wood on a number 4 is that it should not be interacting with the barrel at all. It should not be touching it. If I had one that had been badly set up years ago, before I knew better, and I had a bad time until I'd had it fixed. Once the bands are off, the rear handguard comes off. There's a collar there that holds the rear end of it, and it should not be in contact at all. Now we can take a quick look at how the front part of the bedding is set up. There's contact there, we'll see it a bit more inside. We are totally clear between the barrel and the wood. There is no contact at all until we get to the muzzle bearing here, and this one is absolutely perfect. You've got even clearance on both sides, and then we've got the correct down muzzle pressure, and it self-centers. But the interesting stuff for this video, I'm going to leave explaining how that works to a later video, is in the action. It's how this part works. So, back to the crappy screwdriver. First of all, the trigger guard needs to come off. Now, this is a Mark 1 star, long branch, Canadian. So our trigger mechanism is hinged, is part of the trigger guard. So here we have the first part of the trigger mechanism pivoted on a hinge pin on the trigger guard. Now this is where we need to be a little bit careful, because I don't know how tight this one is. Oh, that's good. Very gently. Right, I just needed, this is a nice tight, well stocked up rifle, so we've got a little bit of play there, and then off it comes. And there you have the insides of the system. Now where I was sitting before, we couldn't really see what was going on because of the light coming from the wrong direction, but I brought it around so that we can see. And the first important thing is you've got the front bearing at the reinforce. So just in front of the receiver, the thick part of the barrel, the Knox form, as it's often referred to in British parlance, has a good contact there. You've then got contact around the front screw, around the size of the receiver for a little bit. It doesn't really matter back here. And then at this point back here, you've got contact with what are called the drawers. So if we get our ring away, so you've got the contact there at the reinforce, contact around here, and then the drawers are these oblique surfaces. And the drawers are these oblique surfaces here where the sear is pivoted. And what these do is they contact a corresponding oblique surface here, so that when you tighten down the screw and those two things get pushed together, that there's a rearward component. Basically that is camming the stock backwards slightly, and that's how you get your intimate, solid contact between the action and the forend. Now this goes right back to the early days, to the Lee Metford, but they really didn't perfect the front part of the bedding, the barrel pressure, until much later. And the attachment here is sufficiently solid that you can have down pressure at the front bearing here, and there's no contact with the wood between the reinforce and the front bearing. And as I mentioned in my TFB video, free floating them tends to have a bad effect, because a barrel that light, the number 4 barrels aren't that light, but in any case they're light enough to be whippy enough to vibrate like a tuning fork. And the up pressure here dampens that down. Now, if there's lateral pressure because the wood's warped, because you've got to remember that at wartime, that a lot of the stocks were not as well seasoned as they could be, and the rifles getting wet and so on, and then drying out, and you never know. And basically, they found that this was a good compromise. Some of the target setup ones would have a mid bearing there. They'd be, the front bearing would be cleared out, and they'd have a mid bearing there. That also worked. A lot of the target bedded rifles, particularly for used with sling supported shooting, they generally believe that had less impact on the influence of the wood on the metal for target shooting. Now, another point to note is that this is Mark 1 stock, so it's solid at the back. Some of the later refurbs of Mark 1 rifles, you sometimes see them with Mark 2 stocks. Now, the Mark 2 rifles had this part of the trigger mechanism pivoted on a lug there. So this part of the forend is split, and they have a screw through to hold the sides together, and they work just as well. And it was an approved modification in refurb, well, not even modification. It was approved to refurb a Mark 1 type rifle with a Mark 2 type stock. Another little point to note. Yes, interesting. I've not actually had this rifle apart before, but you can see that that's been filed. That's clearly been filed by, I presume, an armourer. Ideally, the back end of this shouldn't touch the front end of the butt socket. If yours does and your rifle shoots fine, leave it, don't touch it. It's a general truism with these things, is that the enemy of good is better. If there's no reason to touch something, don't touch it. I have a general view of, I tend not to take rifles out of the stock because I'm doing it for you guys to show you, but as a general rule, no good can come of it. You cannot improve anything. You can only screw it up. I mean, it would be really awful if I cracked the surfaces, the cam surfaces that the drawers bear on to cam the stock in tight. So yeah, so that's how it goes together, and that's how a single screw can have a good solid two-point mounting with the metal. So I hope you enjoyed the video. Please like and subscribe. Please consider supporting us on Patreon if you can spare a few pennies. It's always gratefully received, and I am very, very, very grateful to all our patrons who help to make this kind of content possible. Bye.